the sun was not kind that Monday morning. It stood like a torch in the sky, unbothered, roasting every soul that dared to work under it. But Bambo didn't care. She was already halfway through her second wheelbarrow of cement mix, sweat dripping from her forehead into the concrete below. She worked fast, measured, focused, silent. Most of the men on site couldn't keep up with her. They teased her at first, thinking she would run away after a week like the other girls who tried construction work. But Bambo stayed. Day after day. Month after month. Until the teasing stopped and respect followed. They started calling her Iron Lady. Not because she was loud, but because her back never bent. Her hands, once soft and beautiful, now bore the marks of survival, scratches, calluses, and hardened palms. She was just 24, but life had aged her silently. Her shift foreman, Mr. Bala, shouted from the top of the site, "Bambo. You're on Block B foundation today." She nodded. No complaints. No questions. She never argued, never slacked. Every bag of cement she lifted was not just a job, it was her mother's medication, her younger brother's school fee, the roof above their heads. Her father had disappeared 3 years ago with another woman, leaving them with nothing but debt and shame. She hated him, but she used that hate to mix stronger mortar. Her plan was simple: work. Save. Survive. Love. Romance. She buried those dreams long ago. She had no room for that kind of weakness. But fate doesn't ask permission before stepping in. That same morning, a black Range Rover with tinted glass pulled into the site. It didn't belong there. Construction sites were for noise, sweat, dust, not leather seats and polished shoes. The car parked. The doors opened. A tall man stepped out. Simple shirt. Dark jeans. Clean haircut. Quiet presence. No one recognized him at first, but the moment the site engineer ran over and bowed, everyone whispered. That's Kamsi and Bambo, the CEO. He was the billionaire whose company was building the luxury estate. Rumor had it he never visited sites personally. People said he was cold, untouchable. But there he was, walking through mud and bricks, observing every corner, inspecting the walls with quiet intensity. Bambo didn't notice him at first. She was too busy scraping dry cement from a shovel. When she finally looked up, she saw him standing just a few feet away, his eyes scanning the site, then resting on her. Their eyes locked. Just for a second. She looked away immediately and continued mixing like nothing happened. But something in his gaze stayed with her, curious, steady, unafraid. Kamsi watched her. She was different. Not just because she was the only woman on site. Not just because she worked like she had no backup plan. But because in the middle of all that cement and sweat, she looked alive. Present. Like she carried something more than just blocks on her back. Later that day, something happened. A plank from the upper floor slipped. A worker had left it loose. It fell fast, heavy, sharp, headed straight for Kamsi, who was walking under the scaffolding. No one saw it in time. No one but Bambo. She screamed, dropped her shovel, and ran. With no time to think, she pushed him, hard, out of the way. The plank hit the ground right where he had stood, snapping in two with a loud crack. There was silence. Then shouting. Then applause. But Bambo didn't smile. She didn't like attention. "Are you okay, sir?" she asked, brushing off her dusty trousers, not meeting his eyes. "I am now," he replied softly, still stunned. Then she walked away before anyone else could speak. Back to her shovel. Back to the mix. Kamsi stared after her, completely dazed. He had been rescued by a woman half his size, and he didn't even know her name. But he would find out. That night, Bambo sat on a small stool beside her mother's hospital bed, feeding her pap. Her brother, a booker, sat quietly, doing his homework. "Mama," she whispered, "I saw someone strange today." Her mother looked up weakly. "Who?" "A man. Tall. Clean. Looking like he didn't belong in our world." Her mother chuckled faintly. "You saw a ghost." Bambo smiled. "No, Mama. A billionaire. On. And what did he want with you?" "Nothing. I just saw him. That's all." But deep inside, Bambo knew that wasn't all. Something had shifted. Something was coming. She just didn't know what yet. Nobody expected the boss to come in person. At exactly 11:03 a.m., a sleek black Range Rover glided into the construction site like a panther among goats. The rumble of engines stopped, shovels stiffened mid-air, voices lowered. Supervisors straightened their helmets, engineers tucked in their shirts. It wasn't just any visitor, the visitor. Kamsi Okonkwo, the ghost-like CEO of Royal Estates Limited, the man who reportedly signed checks worth billions without blinking, was here. He stepped out quietly, wearing a plain white shirt, dark jeans, and brown boots. No gold chains. No security parade. But his presence somehow thundered louder than any cement mixer on site. Heads turned like sunflowers chasing daylight. Workers scrambled to look busy. Foremen barked orders. Everyone wanted to be seen, noticed, by the man who could change a laborer's life with a single nod. Everyone except Bambo. She was at the far end of the site, bent over a mixing pit, sleeves rolled up, arms coated in grey mortar from elbow to wrist. Sweat traced lines down her temples. She was so focused on getting the right cement-sand ratio that she didn't realize the quiet billionaire had stopped a few meters behind her, watching. Something about her arrested him, not beauty, not charm, but purpose. How she moved like she was building a temple, not just a house. How she never looked around for praise. She just worked. The site engineer rushed toward him with a shaky smile. "Yes, sir, should I show you the luxury suites? The foundation for Block A is ready." Kamsi raised a palm. "Later. I want to walk alone." He began to stroll slowly through the dusty scaffolding. He passed men lifting blocks, women smoothing plaster, supervisors talking into walkie-talkies, yet his eyes kept drifting back to her. When Bambo finally straightened her back to breathe, she froze. He was standing right there, maybe 6 steps away. Looking at her in a way no one had ever looked at her before. Curious. Quiet. Seeing through her. She quickly wiped her forehead with the back of her arm and stepped aside. "Good day, sir." "What's your name?" he asked calmly. "Bambo," she answered, shocked that her voice still worked. He nodded. "You work hard." "Thank you, sir." Awkward silence. She hated it. Silence gave room for whispers. Quickly, she grabbed another shovel, pretending to be busy. He gave a small smile at her stubborn pride, then slowly stepped back and continued his inspection. But he lingered just long enough for the rumors to begin. Within 10 minutes, someone had whispered, "She's the one he greeted." Another swore, "I saw the way he looked at her, like film." Before the afternoon sun reached midpoint, one story had already spread, "The CEO is secretly watching that cement girl." Bambo tried to drown the whispers with more work. But her heart kept racing. His eyes kept flashing in her memory, calm, sharp, and strange, like he wanted to understand what even she no longer understood about herself. Kamsi left the site after an hour. He said nothing extraordinary. Signed nothing. Changed nothing. Except one thing. From that day onward, Bambo's world would never again be ignored. Bambo swung her lunch cooler over one shoulder and began walking toward the mango tree at the edge of the site, the only spot with a little shade. It was her favorite place to eat, quiet, away from gossiping tongues. She had barely opened her food flask when a shadow covered her face. She looked up. It was him. Kamsi Okonkwo. The billionaire she had pushed out of death's path. Up close, he looked even more intimidating, broad shoulders, clean jawline, eyes sharp like he had seen too much of the world and survived it. Bambo immediately stood up and wiped her dusty hands on her trousers. "Good afternoon, sir," she said, trying not to sound nervous. "Please, just call me Kamsi," he replied, a small smile in his voice. "May I sit?" She blinked. "Sit? With me?" "Sir, this place is dirty." "I like it here," he said, already lowering himself onto the wooden bench next to her. Bambo stood frozen. The man didn't belong on a wooden plank surrounded by rusted nails and stone dust. But there he was, like it was the most natural thing. "I didn't get to thank you properly this morning," Kamsi continued, looking straight at her. "You saved my life." "I was just doing what anyone would do," she mumbled, eyes on the ground. He chuckled. "No." Everyone else froze. "You moved. That matters." Silence stretched between them. She could feel her heart pounding loud in her ears. He pointed at her cooler. "What are you eating?" "Rice and beans, sir." "May I?" Bambo's eyes flew open. "Sir." He was serious. Before she could protest, he had already brought out a stainless steel cutlery set from his pocket and scooped a spoonful of rice like a man who hadn't eaten in days. He said, chewing with surprise. "This tastes better than five-star hotel food." She didn't know whether to laugh or run. "Where did you learn to cook?" "My mother, we used to sell food before she got sick." Kamsi nodded slowly. "You're not just strong. You're talented." She rolled her eyes before she could stop herself. Talented was not a word anyone had ever used for a poor, dusty construction girl. He noticed her embarrassment and placed the spoon down gently. "Bambo, I know I probably look like trouble to you. But I'd really like to know you better." Her breath caught. "Sir, I'm just a laborer. And I'm just a man." She stared at him, confused, a little afraid. No one had ever spoken to her like this. Not with such calm except her late grandma. Everything inside her screamed that this was dangerous. Very dangerous. "Sir, people are watching," she whispered. "Then let them watch," he said firmly. She didn't recognize the person she was becoming as she sat back down and watched him eat more from her cooler. The billionaire who probably dined with presidents was eating her rice and beans, asking about her mother's health, her brother's school, her dreams. By the time the lunch break was over, Bambo's heart no longer felt like stone. As he stood to leave, he turned to her once more. "Tomorrow, don't bring lunch. I want to take you somewhere." Her eyes widened. "I can't. I'll be in my work clothes." He smiled. "Then I'll come in mine." With that, he walked away, dust rising around his shoes, leaving Bambo staring after him, lost. She stood there long after he disappeared, clutching her empty cooler like it was a new kind of treasure. For the first time in a very long while, she caught herself smiling. But she also knew that smiles come with consequences. What happens when Kamsi returns the next day with a plan that will change her world forever? From the moment Kamsi walked away after sharing her lunch, a strange wind began to blow around the construction site. It wasn't real wind, it was whispers. Small at first, then growing like wildfire through dry grass. "Did you see the CEO eating her food? Who is Bambo to him? She wants to trap him, that's why she saved him." Bambo pretended not to notice. She focused on her work with double strength, carrying blocks 2 at a time, mixing cement like a robot. But gossip has sharp teeth, it chews on dignity even when you keep your head down. During break time, she usually sat alone. Today, 3 women from the brick section came and surrounded her. "Madam Iron Lady," one of them said with mock respect. "So, big men are now eating your rice and beans." Bambo stayed silent. Another woman leaned close. "Better bring charm for us too. We also want husbands that drive Range Rover." They burst into laughter. Bambo's face remained unreadable, but her heart burned. She packed her cooler and stood up. The third woman spat on the ground. "You think you're better than us? Small time we'll hear you're pregnant for him." That was when she spoke, her voice calm but firm. "I don't fight over what God didn't give me. Leave me alone." She walked away, but their voices followed behind like shadows. By the time the siren signaled end of work, almost everyone had a version of the story. Some said the CEO slept with her under the mango tree. Others swore she was his secret wife pretending to be a poor laborer. Bambo dragged herself to the bus stop, exhaustion weighing heavier than the cement she carried. The evening sky was bruised purple, clouds gathering like fists ready to break open. Buses were scarce, so workers leaned against rusty poles, sweating and gossiping while flies danced around. 2 men from the electrical section were standing nearby. One of them nudged the other, laughing. "See her, cement girl with billionaire taste." Bambo clenched her jaw. She wished she could vanish. Just then, a black SUV slowly approached the bus stop. All heads turned sharply. It was not the Range Rover from the site, but it looked expensive. The smooth window rolled down. Kamsi's personal driver stuck out his head. "Bambo. Ogre said I should pick you." The entire bus stop froze. Bambo's blood left her body. "Here? In front of all these people?" She stepped back slowly, shaking her head. No, no, tell him thank you. I'll go myself. The driver tried again. Madam, please enter. Rain is coming. No, she said sharply and turned her back. People began to whisper like school children witnessing scandal. After a few seconds the SUV drove away, leaving a trail of dust and a girl who suddenly felt naked in public. She finally got on a noisy yellow bus, squashed between sweaty strangers. As the rain began to fall, she pressed her face to the window and closed her eyes, ashamed, angry, confused, at everything. By the time Bambo reached home, the compound was already flooded. She tiptoed past neighbors, hoping no one would notice her. As she opened their single-room door, her little brother Abuka jumped up happily. Sis! Sis! Look! He held out a brand new pair of school shoes. Auntie from next room said a tall rich man brought it. He said it's for me and that you'll understand. Bambo's stomach flipped. On the table was also a small brown envelope with her mother's hospital name written on it. Inside was a hospital deposit receipt. 250,000 naira. Cleared. Stamped. Paid. Her mother, thin and tired but smiling faintly, said, "My daughter, God has remembered us. That kind young man said you saved his life. He said this is nothing." Bambo dropped to her knees, tears welling. "Mama, people already think bad of me because of him." Her mother touched her hair. "Let people think anything. When God sends a helper, no enemy can stop it." But Bambo couldn't shake the fear twisting her heart. She sat outside the door later that night as rain poured hard. She hugged her knees and cried quietly, not because of suffering, but because kindness was something she no longer knew how to accept. The next morning, she arrived at work before sunrise, hoping to avoid attention. But as she stepped onto the site, hundreds of eyes turned to her at once. Someone shouted, "Oga wife don come." Everyone burst into laughter. Another mocked, "Where is your engagement ring?" Bambo felt her cheeks heat with shame. She wanted to run out but forced her legs to stay. As she bent to pick up a shovel, a loud voice barked behind her. "Enough!" The entire site fell into dead silence as Kamsi walked in, his face stone-hard, his eyes blazing with fury. "Who among you was sent here to gossip instead of work?" he thundered. "Anyone without self-control can take their salary today and leave my company." People shifted nervously. Not taking his eyes off the crowd, he called, "Bambo, follow me." Her heart stopped. She hesitated, but his tone held no room for refusal. Slowly, she dropped her shovel and followed him across the site, past walls and machines, into a quiet office container. She stood there trembling as he closed the door behind them. For a moment, he didn't speak. He just stared at her with eyes full of something unreadable. Then softly he said, "Why did you refuse my driver yesterday?" She looked down. "Sir. I didn't want more rumors." Kamsi stepped closer. "What if I don't care about rumors?" Her breath hitched. "But I care," she whispered. Kamsi nodded gently, studying her. Then, out of nowhere, he said, "Bambo. I want to remove you from this site. I want to offer you a better life." Her head shot up in confusion. "I have a proposal for you," he said calmly. "But once I tell you, your life will never remain the same." Bambo stood in front of the cracked mirror in the small room she shared with her mother and brother, staring at her reflection. The dress she had picked was simple, a faded yellow wraparound dress with frayed edges at the hem. Her sandals, though well worn, were the only shoes she had that would work with the dress. The fabric clung to her curves in a way she hadn't noticed before, but she didn't care. It wasn't anything special. But then, why did she feel so out of place? Her hands were shaking as she ran a comb through her hair, still damp from her quick shower. She had tried to ignore Kamsi's invitation, but when he insisted, she couldn't refuse. He was a billionaire, someone like her didn't belong in his world. Why would he want to take someone like me to a fancy restaurant? The thought churned in her stomach. She wasn't sure what scared her more, the idea of stepping into a world that didn't belong to her, or the possibility that Kamsi would see her as nothing more than a curiosity. But as much as she tried to ignore it, something inside her, something unexplainable, told her she had to go. So, she went, putting on the only dress she had that was even remotely close to what someone might wear to a place like the one Kamsi had described. She could barely afford the bus ride there, but somehow, she found herself standing in front of the full-length mirror, wondering why she felt like she was about to break in two. The knock at the door startled her. "Bambo, you okay?" It was a Booker, her younger brother. She forced a smile. "Yes, I'm fine. Just thinking." A Booker's eyes searched hers, but he said nothing. Instead, he reached into his school bag and pulled out a crumpled note. "Mama says don't forget to bring something nice for the food. You'll be fine, okay?" Bambo nodded but didn't answer. She gave her brother a quick hug and told him she'd be back soon. She could already feel the weight of the evening ahead. The bus ride to the restaurant was a blur. She clutched her purse tightly, trying not to notice the stares of the passengers who looked at her disheveled clothes. She couldn't help but feel out of place. This wasn't her world. It wasn't where she belonged. And yet, she couldn't help but feel an unspoken pull to the restaurant, to Kamsi, and to the mystery he represented. When the bus finally pulled up at the restaurant's entrance, she was momentarily stunned. The place was magnificent, an imposing glass and steel structure that reflected the last traces of daylight in a dazzling glow. Bambo hesitated, her heart racing. She could turn back, she could leave, but her feet were already moving forward, carried by the invisible force that had been pulling her all along. Inside, everything was pristine, gleaming floors, soft lighting, the aroma of gourmet food mingling with the faint scent of fresh flowers. The hostess, dressed in a crisp uniform, smiled politely as she led Bambo to the back of the restaurant, where a private booth sat near a window, overlooking the city. Kamsi stood up when she arrived, a warm smile spreading across his face. He was dressed in a tailored suit, looking every bit the part of the billionaire businessman. But when he saw her, standing there in her simple yellow dress, shoes worn down from the rough streets, hair still damp, his expression softened. His eyes filled with admiration, something Bambo hadn't seen in a long time. "You look beautiful," he said, his voice warm. Bambo swallowed the lump in her throat and forced a smile. "Thank you, Kamsi. But I feel out of place." He shook his head, stepping closer. "You're exactly where you're supposed to be." She hesitated but sat down, feeling the weight of his gaze on her. The menu was handed to her, but she barely looked at it. Kamsi ordered for both of them, something rich, something expensive. And when the food arrived, she tried her best to fit in, to act like she belonged. But as the meal progressed, Bambo could feel herself shrinking with every passing moment. The waiters glided around them with flawless precision, the laughter of other patrons filled the air, and Bambo could only focus on the feeling of being out of place. When she couldn't take it anymore, she pushed her plate away. "I don't belong here, Kamsi." His brow furrowed in confusion. "What do you mean?" "I don't belong in this world, this life," she said, her voice trembling. "I'm just a girl who mixes cement on a construction site. This isn't my world. It's yours, not mine." Kamsi's expression softened. He reached across the table, his fingers brushing hers. "Bambo, this is my world, yes. But I don't want you here because of who you aren't, I want you here because of who you are. You are kind, hardworking, and real. That's what I admire about you." Bambo's chest tightened. She looked away, fighting back tears. "You don't understand. People will judge me. They already do." "Let them judge," Kamsi said firmly. "What matters is how we see each other." Bambo stood up suddenly, unable to sit still any longer. She began pacing around the restaurant, her mind a whirlwind. "I'm not like you, Kamsi. I don't know how to fit in this life you live. I'm just a girl who's trying to survive, just trying to make it through each day without losing myself. I don't know what you see in me." Kamsi stood and walked toward her, his voice low and calm. "I see everything in you, Bambo. I see your strength, your resilience. I see someone who can teach me more about life than any of these rich dinners ever could." She laughed bitterly, shaking her head. "You don't know what it's like to live like I do. You don't know the pain of having nothing but hope to cling to. You think you're doing me a favor by giving me this dinner, but it only reminds me of how different we are." He stepped closer, his voice gentle. "I'm not doing you a favor. I'm offering you something real. A chance to experience a different life, if you want it." Bambo froze. She met his gaze, eyes wide and filled with uncertainty. "What if I don't want it?" He reached out, taking her hand in his. "Then I'll respect that. But don't sell yourself short, Bambo. You deserve more than just survival. You deserve a chance to live. The air between them crackled with tension, but slowly, Bambo's breathing began to even out. She had been afraid, so afraid of the unknown, of the world she couldn't control. But Kamsi's words, they made her realize something she had never allowed herself to believe: she deserved more. She smiled softly, finally letting go of her fear. Thank you, Kamsi. For everything. He smiled back, his eyes filled with affection. This is just the beginning, Bambo. I promise, the next time we do this, I'll make sure it's even grander. Bambo's heart fluttered at his words, the promise of something more filling the empty space she had kept locked away for so long. And as the evening wore on, she allowed herself to believe, just for a moment, that maybe, just maybe, she could step into this new life with him. The evening passed in a blur of lights and soft laughter. The tension between Bambo and Kamsi had dissipated, but it left an unfamiliar feeling in the air, something fragile, yet undeniable. Bambo could feel her heart slowly loosening its grip on the walls she had built around it, walls created from years of hard work, shame, and survival. As Kamsi insisted on walking her back to the bus stop, the street seemed quieter than usual, almost too quiet, like the city itself was holding its breath. Bambo found herself walking beside him, her thoughts a whirl of emotions she hadn't known how to name. You know, Kamsi began, breaking the silence, I think that was the best conversation I've had all week. Bambo glanced at him, surprised by his words. You must meet a lot of people then. Too many, he admitted with a chuckle. But none of them seem as real as you. Bambo felt her cheeks flush, and she looked away, her heart hammering in her chest. She had never been comfortable with compliments. They felt foreign to her, like a well-worn coat that didn't quite fit. But there was something in Kamsi's voice, something genuine, that made her believe him. They reached the bus stop, and Kamsi stepped back, his gaze still fixed on her. I'll call you a cab. It's too late for you to take a bus alone. Bambo shook her head. I can't accept that. I'm fine with the bus. She wanted to refuse his kindness, but the truth was, she wasn't sure how to let anyone take care of her. He seemed to understand. Bambo, please, just this once. His voice was firm, but there was a softness in it that made her pause. For a moment, she just stood there, torn between pride and need. The bus would take her longer, would leave her in the rain with the other tired, struggling passengers. But the cab would be a shortcut to the comfort and security that she had never known. The contrast between the two choices felt like a sharp knife slicing through her thoughts. I'll let you, she said, finally relenting. A few minutes later, a sleek black car pulled up in front of them. Bambo hesitated before sliding into the backseat, glancing at Kamsi one last time. Thank you, she murmured, her voice barely a whisper. He smiled, the same warm, unguarded smile that made her heart race. You don't need to thank me, Bambo. I just want you to be safe. The car moved through the city, and for the first time, Bambo allowed herself to close her eyes and feel the weight of the evening settle around her. She felt like an intruder in a life she had never imagined for herself. The glittering lights outside, the smooth leather seats beneath her, none of it was real to her. It felt like a dream that would fade the moment she opened her eyes. But Kamsi's words echoed in her mind. You deserve more than just survival. You deserve a chance to live. The next morning, Bambo woke up with the memory of the dinner still lingering in her mind. She had spent the entire night turning it over in her head, what Kamsi had said, the way he had looked at her, the way he made her feel like she was worthy of more than the life she had been living. But with that realization came a flood of fear. Fear of losing the only thing she had, her independence. She dressed quickly, the fabric of her work clothes rough against her skin as she prepared for another day of mixing cement. Another day of proving herself on the construction site. But something inside her felt different. She couldn't shake the feeling that her life was about to change, that the man she had met, this billionaire, had opened a door she wasn't sure she was ready to walk through. As she walked to the bus stop, the streets felt different, too. It wasn't just the usual hustle of the city, it was as if the air itself was thick with possibility. Bambo tried to push the thought away, but it lingered. She couldn't go back to her old life, could she? Not now, when she knew what was possible, what Kamsi had shown her. She was so lost in thought that she didn't notice the group of workers ahead of her until one of them called out. Look who's back. The CEO's girl. Bambo's heart skipped a beat. She tried to ignore them, but the whispers followed her, growing louder with every step. She's so lucky, her lucky billionaire boyfriend. All that cement mixing for nothing. Bambo clenched her jaw, but she kept walking. Let them talk. She had learned long ago that gossip was the price of being alive in a world that didn't care about you. But today, their words stung in a way they never had before. It was one thing to be the outsider at work, to be mocked for her gender and her place on the ladder. But now, she felt something else, a shift in the way the world saw her, in the way she saw herself. That afternoon, Kamsi called her. His voice was calm, but there was an edge to it that Bambo could hear even through the phone. I need to talk to you, he said. Can you meet me tomorrow? I want to show you something. Bambo hesitated. What's going on, Kamsi? I'll explain when you get here, he said, his tone softening. I promise, it's nothing bad. Bambo sighed and looked out the window of her small room, the city noise muffling her thoughts. Something inside her told her to be cautious, but another part of her, the part that had been awakened by the dinner, by his words, urged her to go. Okay, she said quietly. I'll come. The next day, Bambo arrived at the location Kamsi had mentioned. It was a different part of the city, an area that felt more like an oasis than the chaotic construction site she was used to. Kamsi was already there, waiting for her in front of a large, modern building with glass windows that gleamed in the sunlight. This is the future, he said, looking up at the building with pride. And I want you to be part of it, Bambo. Her heart raced as she looked around, the weight of the decision heavy in her chest. I don't know if I can be part of this world, Kamsi, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. He turned to her, his gaze steady. You already are. Whether you like it or not, you've already changed everything. The sun had barely begun to rise when the call came. Kamsi was standing by the window of his penthouse, a cup of dark coffee in one hand, his phone vibrating softly in the other. He answered without checking the screen, he already knew who it was. Only one person ever called him that early. Good morning, Mum. There was no warmth in her response. Kamsi. I need to speak with you, now. He sighed, sipping his coffee slowly. I'm listening. His mother didn't waste time. I heard you've been seen around town with a girl from your construction site. A girl who mixes cement with her bare hands. Is this some kind of joke? Kamsi closed his eyes for a second, then turned to face the sunlight pouring into the room. Her name is Bambo, Mum. And no, it's not a joke. Bambo. His mother's voice cracked like glass. What kind of name is that? Do you know who you are, Kamsi Ochukwu? Do you remember your bloodline? Your father built a legacy from nothing, and I stood beside him every step. Do you think we suffered just so you could throw it all away on a girl who wears cement like perfume? Kamsi stayed quiet, letting her words land like thunder. He was used to her passion. But this was deeper. This wasn't just worry. It was fear of shame, of status, of what society might say. Kamsi, she continued, her voice trembling now, I got a call from your uncle this morning. He said some social media blogger is already trying to spin a story about you dating a site worker. What happens when your shareholders find out? What happens when the press gets involved? Kamsi walked across the room and leaned against the dining table, his voice calm but firm. I don't care what anyone thinks, Mum. Not the press. Not our friends. Not the shareholders. Not even the board. This isn't about them. It's about me. It's about what I feel. And what do you feel, Kamsi? She asked, almost mockingly. He paused. Peace. For the first time in years. Peace and joy and clarity. With her, I don't feel like a billionaire or a CEO. I feel like a man. A real one. Do you know how rare that is in my world? There was silence on the line. Then, like a cold slap, his mother said it. If you go forward with this, with her, I will remove you from the family trust. Your inheritance, your shares, your position, everything. He chuckled lightly, though it hurt inside. You really think I'm with Bambo for money? I think you're being reckless, she snapped. I think, he countered gently, you're being judgmental. Mum, have you met her? Do I need to? Yes, he said. Yes, you do. Not as my mother. But as a woman. You need to see her heart. Her resilience. Her mind. She's brilliant, Mum. She just never had what I had, the privilege. But give her 5 minutes, and you'll see what I see. She said nothing. Please, he whispered, just meet her. That's all I'm asking. 3 days later, the meeting happened. It was a quiet Sunday afternoon when Kamsi drove Bambo to his parents' estate. Bambo had been terrified the moment he told her, but he gently held her hands and said, "Just be you. That's the woman I love." As they walked into the grand living room, polished marble floors, gold-framed art, velvet chairs, Bambo felt like her lungs were folding. She had worn a simple long gown, neatly ironed, with her hair in a soft bun. No makeup. Just her truth. Kamsi's mother sat like royalty in the center of the room. She was striking, graceful, elegant, and strong. The kind of woman who didn't blink twice when commanding a boardroom full of men. And now, her eyes were locked on Bambo, cold and unreadable. "You must be Bambo," she said. Bambo nodded, her voice gentle. "Yes, Ma. Good afternoon." She only replied with a nod, her fingers tapping the side of her glass slowly. "Sit." The next hour was cold. The questions came, sharp, calculated, dressed in politeness but laced with doubt. "Where are your parents? What school did you attend? How long have you been working in construction? Why didn't you study something better? Have you ever been in a relationship with a rich man before?" Bambo answered each one with quiet dignity. She didn't oversell herself. She didn't flinch. She simply told the truth. "I mix cement because it pays," she said at one point. "But it's not who I am. I'm a reader. I love economics. I never had the chance to go beyond secondary school, but I read journals, watched lectures online, and I'm currently saving to write my university entrance exam. One day, I want to build something of my own, not buildings, but policies that make life better for women who never got a chance." There was a pause. For the first time, Kamsi's mother looked at her with something other than disgust. Curiosity. "And why my son?" she asked, voice low. "He can have anyone." "I didn't ask for him," Bambo replied, steady. "I even tried to avoid him. But he saw me, not my clothes, not my hands, not my past. He just saw me. And treated me like I mattered. I never had that before." Something shifted in the room. The air softened. Later that evening, after Kamsi had driven Bambo home, he returned to find his mother alone in the garden, sipping tea. She looked up as he walked toward her, and for the first time in a while, she didn't scowl. "You chose well," she said simply. Kamsi blinked. "Sorry. She's rough around the edges, yes. But strong. And honest. And not trying to impress me." He smiled, lowering himself beside her. "She reminds me of myself," she added with a faint laugh. "Except I wore heels to my first board meeting." Kamsi laughed too. "I'm glad you see her now." His mother looked away thoughtfully. "The world will judge. They always do. But, maybe this one time, you're right to ignore them." She reached into her purse and pulled out a small envelope. "What's this?" he asked. "An invitation. There's a gala dinner for all board members and their families next week. Bring her." Kamsi blinked again, stunned. "You want me to take Bambo to a Billionaire'S gala?" "Yes," she said. "Let them see what a woman really looks like." Kamsi leaned forward and kissed her forehead. "Thank you, Mum." She waved him off with a smirk. "Just make sure she doesn't wear her cement boots." The grand opening of the Royal Crest Estate was the biggest event of the year. The media had camped for hours. Influencers streamed live, drones hovered above, and political dignitaries had already taken their seats beneath a golden canopy that stretched across the main entrance of the estate. Bambo had never seen so many powerful people in one place. She wore her site uniform, as instructed, though she'd ironed it and cleaned her shoes. She blended with the rest of the workers seated at the back, far from the main canopy where the governor and real estate moguls gathered. She had no idea what was about to happen. On the stage, Kamsi stood confidently, his tailored navy suit hugging his tall frame, a microphone in one hand and poise in the other. Cameramen adjusted their focus, reporters leaned forward, and his proud mother, seated beside the Minister of Housing, clapped politely. "Ladies and gentlemen," Kamsi's voice rang through the loudspeakers, "today is not just about bricks and buildings. It's about people." There was a pause. The crowd expected the usual business acknowledgements, thanks to the architects, engineers, financiers, but Kamsi's eyes scanned the crowd, not for the wealthy or the well-known, but for the one who made his heart beat steady in storms, Bambo. She came from nothing, Kamsi continued. She mixes cement with her bare hands. She works when others sleep. She built with us, not because she had to, but because she refused to let poverty bury her dreams. Bambo shrank in her seat. Why was he talking like this? People were turning, murmuring. Then Kamsi said the unthinkable. Please help me welcome Miss Bambo Olaron for me to the stage. Gasps filled the air. Some laughed nervously, expecting a PR stunt. Others looked confused. Bambo froze. Was this a joke? One of the ushers rushed to her. Come, madam. Ogade call you. Go stage. With trembling legs, she climbed the polished stairs. Every step echoed like a thunderclap in her ears. The spotlight burned on her dusty boots. Her hands were chalk white with dried cement. Still, she stood beside him. The workers cheered wildly at the back. The elites at the front clapped, unsure of what this moment meant. Kamsi turned to her, and the noise faded. The world paused. Then he knelt. Yes. Knelt. On one knee. In front of governors, millionaires, CEOs, cameras, and the woman who had sworn never to accept her. Even his own mother gasped audibly. The crowd erupted. Phones flew into the air. The live feed began to trend instantly. Bambo, he said, looking up at her like she was the only one under heaven, I've built estates, bought lands, and signed deals worth billions, but none of that has ever made me feel as alive as I do when I see you smile. Her breath caught in her throat. I know you didn't ask for this. I know this is not your world. But you are my peace in the chaos. You are my reminder that beauty is not in appearances, but in strength. In simplicity. In sincerity. He brought out a small velvet box. Inside it gleamed a ring as clear as her heart. The crowd gasped again. Bambo, will you marry me? Tears flooded her eyes. Her fingers trembled over her mouth. She looked out, hundreds of eyes stared back, but all she saw was the man on his knees. The man who had seen her when no one else did. She wanted to run. She wanted to faint. But most of all, she wanted to say yes. Yes, she whispered. The microphone picked it. The crowd roared. She nodded again. Yes. Yes, Kamsi. I will marry you. He rose, slid the ring onto her dusty finger, and pulled her into a long, trembling embrace. From the front row, his mother sat stiff, her hands clenched into her purse. But even she couldn't stop the tear that rolled silently down her cheek. Because for the first time, she saw what he had seen all along, a girl who didn't need the world's approval to shine. As the press swarmed in and the announcer tried to restore order, Kamsi turned to the crowd and smiled. Now that's how you lay the most important foundation of your life, he said, holding her hand aloft. Laughter. Applause. Joy. But inside Bambo's chest, a storm of emotions raged. How had a simple girl from Makako found herself saying yes in front of the nation? Later that evening, long after the crowd had dispersed and the cameras stopped flashing, Kamsi found her sitting quietly on the edge of the estate fountain. He came up beside her. No words. Just presence. She turned to him. You didn't have to do all that, Kamsi. He smiled softly. I had to. Because I'm not just proposing to you, I'm announcing to the world that I'm proud of the woman I love. She looked down at the ring. It still didn't make sense. She was still wearing her cement-stained boots. And yet. I don't know what to say, she whispered. Say you'll let me take you out on a bigger date than the restaurant, he chuckled. She laughed, wiping tears. Can we go somewhere quieter this time? He grinned. Anywhere you want. As long as you're with me. And just like that, beneath the lights of the estate she once helped build with calloused hands, she leaned on his shoulder, not just a cement girl anymore, but a queen in her own right. The video had gone viral before the event even ended. Kamsi, the reclusive real estate mogul, was on his knee before a dusty, simple-dressed construction worker, in front of governors, senators, celebrities, media giants, and a sea of murmuring guests at the grand estate launch. And just like that, Bambo became the most talked-about woman in the country. At first, there was silence, like everyone was processing the moment. Then came the clicks. Cameras, phones, live streams. Then, murmurs, laughter, shock, confusion. The crowd burst into a sea of reactions, from cheers to gasps to scornful chuckles. Some clapped. Others exchanged knowing looks, as if this was a publicity stunt. Some elites stood frozen, their champagne flutes halfway to their lips. A few women in expensive gowns looked Bambo up and down like she was a glitch in the program. But Bambo stood still, rooted to the spot. Tears gathered in her eyes. Kamsi's voice trembled, but he didn't rise. I don't care who's watching. I don't care what they'll say. Bambo, will you marry me? The microphone caught the tremor in her voice, yes. The applause was loud, but not louder than the criticism that would follow. By the next morning, Bambo's image was on every blog and gossip site. Billionaire falls for cement girl. Some headlines were cruel, from concrete mixer to mansion mistress. Gold digger or Cinderella. Kamsi's mother seen leaving launch in tears. And it wasn't just strangers. Board members of Kamsi's company were worried. Investors called for private meetings. Old flames of Kamsi suddenly surfaced with shady DMs and Instagram shade. Former girlfriends of status posted cryptic captions, glad I dodged a cement-coated bullet. But it was Kamsi's mother, Madame Clarissa, who lit the real fire. She had left the event in silence. But the next morning, her call to Kamsi was anything but calm. I raised you better, Kamsi. How dare you humiliate this family? Mum, I didn't humiliate anyone. I proposed to the woman I love. You could have done that in private. But you had to turn it into a circus? A press show? I will not have a girl who wears second-hand overalls sitting at my table. She's not just a girl in overalls. She's the reason this estate exists. She worked harder than most of the supervisors. She didn't even know who I was when we met. That's the kind of woman I want beside me. Clarissa hissed into the phone. This Bambo girl, does she even have family? Education? Connections? You think love alone will carry a marriage in our world? She will embarrass you at diplomatic dinners, Kamsi. Then I won't go to diplomatic dinners. Kamsi. I'm serious, Mum. I've dated beauty queens and lawyers. They loved my wallet, not me. Bambo is different. I will not trade her for anyone. Clarissa's voice dropped. If you marry her, I will write you out of my will. And I'll pull out my shares from your company. I already have everything I need, Mum. I have Bambo. Click. But that wasn't the end. Clarissa didn't rest. She called family elders. She arranged a private meeting with Kamsi's uncle, who flew in to talk sense into him. She even tried to invite Bambo to her mansion to intimidate her. Bambo refused. I'm not going where I'm not respected, she told Kamsi. I'm not ashamed of who I am. But I also won't walk into a lion's den. That night, Kamsi went to his mother's house alone. Clarissa was waiting, dressed in lace, sipping tea like royalty. So, are you here to end this madness? No, I'm here to ask you to see what I see. Not through your eyes, but through mine. She raised a brow. Do you remember your first years with Dad? How Grandma opposed you because you were just a schoolteacher's daughter. But he loved you anyway. Clarissa looked away. You told me once, real love is rare. If you find it, fight for it. That's what I'm doing. Clarissa didn't answer. Kamsi took out his phone. He played a video. It showed Bambo at the site. Her face sweaty, hands dusty, helping lift a broken pipe with the plumbers. Giving her lunch to a sick foreman. Fixing a cracked foundation mistake with nothing but instinct and hard work. She's not just a cement girl. She's gold wrapped in dust. She's fireproof. That's who I want beside me. Clarissa's fingers tightened on her teacup. Let me meet her. Not as an enemy. But as a mother. The meeting was small. No press. No cameras. Just Bambo in her modest gown and headscarf, sitting nervously on the cream leather sofa in Clarissa's sitting room. Clarissa served the tea herself. I hear you're the reason Block D didn't collapse. Bambo smiled shyly. I just did what I knew. You know. I used to teach architecture. Before I became Madame Clarissa. Their conversation flowed slowly, like water pushing through stone. But when Bambo spoke about her dreams of owning a small contracting firm for women, Clarissa's eyes softened. When Bambo said, "I never wanted to date your son. I didn't even know he was the boss. I just respected how kind he was," Clarissa finally sighed. Then maybe, he's chosen right. That night, Bambo and Kamsi sat outside on the edge of the new estate, looking at the stars. "You okay?" he asked. "I'm scared," she said. "Not of you. Of what the world will keep throwing at us." "Then let them throw. I'll catch. You run." She smiled. It's funny, love felt like a fairy tale. But now, it's feeling like war. He pulled her closer. "Then let's win together." They kissed, not the kiss of a scandal, but the kind that history writes about. The sun rose slowly over the village, painting golden streaks across the red rooftops and scattering warm light over the newly completed estate. That day, the air smelled not of cement or sawdust, but of promise, joy, and quiet triumph. It wasn't a typical wedding. There were no royal carriages or long cathedral aisles. No gold-rimmed plates or chandeliers dripping with wealth. What stood in place of all that luxury was a dusty courtyard near the estate Kamsi had just opened, filled with rows of chairs, local villagers in traditional attires, high-heeled elites brushing off dust from their shoes, and of course, cameras flashing from every corner. And there, under a simple arch made from bricks and cement, stood Bambo, now in her white dress and her signature brown work boots, the same ones she'd worn the first day she ever worked at the site. She didn't want anything extravagant. Not because Kamsi couldn't afford it, he could buy her a palace and line the streets with diamonds, but because she wanted this day to reflect them. Their real journey. Their love that bloomed in between bricks, sweat, and shared Gary. Her dress was soft and flowing, yet simple, like water over smooth stones. She wore her hair in a low bun, adorned with a tiny white flower Kamsi had once picked for her behind the mixing site. And her veil? It was sewn by her own hands, using a bit of lace from her late mother's wrapper. Kamsi, in a sharp cream-colored native attire, walked up with his groomsmen, some dressed in suits, others proudly wearing reflector vests and hard hats. They represented where he came from and what he stood for: wealth, yes, but also humility, labor, and the dignity of every soul that had touched his life. As he reached the altar, the crowd hushed. The music faded into a soft background hum. Bambo walked forward, her boots softly crunching on the gravel aisle, and the whispers began. "Is that really her? She's still wearing boots. She's glowing. She's beautiful." When she reached him, Kamsi smiled, eyes shining with tears he didn't bother to hide. He leaned forward and whispered, "You've never looked more like a queen." She chuckled. "You're marrying a cement girl in boots. You sure you're ready for this scandal?" He took her hands. "We've been a scandal since day one. Let's make it legendary." The officiating elder smiled as he looked at the couple, so different, yet so complete. "This is not a wedding of perfection," he began. "This is a wedding of truth. Of healing. Of two people who saw each other beneath the surface, and dared to believe in something bigger than their fears." The vows were short, but every word soaked into the hearts of the audience like rain on thirsty ground. "I vow," Kamsi said, "to never try to change you, because loving you just as you are has already changed me." "I vow," Bambo replied, her voice steady, "to never forget where we started, because in those humble beginnings, I found the kind of love even fairy tales can't explain." There was no need for a choir. The villagers sang. The elite clapped. Workers wept. Kamsi's mother, who once threatened to disinherit her son, now sat beside Bambo's aunt, wiping her tears with the corner of her expensive scarf. She had come around, after Kamsi, with fire in his voice and truth in his eyes, told her that Bambo wasn't a mistake to correct but a miracle to cherish. "I've dated ladies with 10 degrees and zero compassion," he had told her. "I've dined with women who know how to dress a table but not how to hold a broken man. Bambo held me when I was angry, tired, and silent. She built with me. That's a rare kind of woman." The guests cheered when they were pronounced husband and wife. And instead of marching out to fancy orchestra music, they danced out in boots and wrappers, to the sound of village drums and high-life music. Instead of a champagne toast, they drank zobo and laughed freely. Kamsi fed Bambo coconut rice on a wooden spoon, right on the steps of the estate they built together. The first wedding picture that went viral wasn't of them kissing. It was Bambo in her wedding dress and muddy boots, hugging an old site worker with grey hair and cement-stained hands. A journalist captioned it, "Not your average Cinderella, the girl who built her way to the altar. Another wrote, from mixing sand to mixing hearts, inside the wedding that broke every rule. Kamsi and Bambo didn't care about headlines anymore. They had found what most people never do, a love that wasn't polished, but proven. A love that wasn't inherited, but earned. And as the sun set and the night drew in, the new couple sat by the bonfire, surrounded by people who truly mattered. Kamsi pulled Bambo close. Ready for our forever? She leaned on his shoulder. If it comes with more bricks and more boots, I'm all in. Ring sparkles, and so ends the journey of a cement girl who was never just a worker, but a builder of hearts, a restorer of dignity, and the bride of a man who saw her beyond the dust. If this story moved your heart, please do us one kind favor, like this video, drop a comment, and hit that subscribe button. We have more heartfelt, inspiring love stories coming your way, and your support helps us tell them even louder and better. Thank you for watching.